Let's move on now to the AI Storybook project. So this project is the principal investigators are Dr. Amy Booth, Professor of Psychology and Human Development, Dr. Georgene Troseth, Professor Emerita of Psychology, Dr. Margaret Shavlik, she's a child development specialist and research scientist here at Vanderbilt, and Dr. Abigail Petulante, DSI postdoctoral fellow and the lead data scientist for the project. Let's hear about the AI Storybook.
Awesome. I'm just going to share my screen. And make sure that the team has slide control. And then you guys should be ready to start.
Yeah. Hi, we are the AIDA team, which stands for an Artificially Intelligent Dialogic Reading Aid. As you can see below, these are our team members. So we'll start off with a scenario here. Imagine you're a parent sitting down with your 4-year-old child for an evening story. You're eager to make this session interactive and engaging, so you start with a classic, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. You begin by asking, what do you think the story is about, hoping to initiate a conversation, but your child shrugs and says, I don't know. Undeterred, you turn the page and ask, what color is the caterpillar, you ask, and your child impatiently replies, just read it. For many parents, facilitating shared reading with children isn't as straightforward as they might initially believe. Now, at the core of our project is this concept of dialogic reading, which is a reading comprehension tool that turns shared book reading into a meaningful conversation about the story in which the adult prompts the child with questions about a book that they read together, and in turn, the child responds in a way that makes the story more engaging. And this is important because this technique has been shown to vastly improve reading comprehension in younger children, ages 2 to 6.
So then we also want to emphasize different points of why we're making this AIDA in the first place. So it can be difficult for parents to come up with their own questions on the spot, which is why we want to know what types of questions are also appropriate to ask with the AIDA reading aid. So we want to remember when and what to ask, and then also to have an even stronger impact. We want this type of reading to be accessible for everyone, especially for the children and parents both. AIDA itself stands for Artificially Intelligent Dialogic Reading Aid, which is our tool to help put these dialogic reading questions from storybooks in order to create a conversation. So 3 points that we mainly wanted to emphasize was its easy to use application so that both parents and children can be able to navigate it. We also wanted to make sure it's friendly, culturally sensitive, and appropriate, and also minimally invasive to already existing reading behaviors. So to do this, we wanted to use cutting-edge AI tools in order to generate these simple but critical thinking reading questions that have a conversation in order to help these children expand their reading skills. And so
here's the basic process of how AIDA works and what the user sees. So first, AIDA collects some basic info, some demographic information about the age of the child, how many times they've read the book, things like that. And then second, the adult reads the book aloud to the child. And as that's happening, AIDA is listening and transcribing the audio into text using Whisper. Using the transcribed audio, as well as the original book text, AIDA ends up generating some age-appropriate dialogic reading questions, and it presents them to the parent through a simple app interface.
So the first and second steps, collecting the information from parents and parents reading the book, won't be the challenges. The challenge starts from the real-time transcription. As we compare different models, so from the Hugging Face or the OpenAI Whisper API or other models, the OpenAI recently released OpenAI Whisper API this year, and OpenAI small models seem to work generally better than others. Although Whisper small model will be generally faster than the API calling, it is not as accurate as the most recent OpenAI Whisper API. So we ended up deciding to use a Whisper API. And fast and accurate transcription will be really important for this project because this will be the very first step before actually generating the questions, which will take longer time when calling GPT 3.5 or even GPT-4 models. It also doesn't make sense if the transcription is too slow and when the parents turn the page, the transcription is still not finished, not to say the question generation process.
Now let's talk about generating questions with GPT-4. So what makes good dialogic reading questions? Well, first, meaningful questions encourage children to think creatively and give them the confidence to express themselves freely, while age-appropriate language is also important to ensure that the words being used suit the child's development level, as well as questions that encourage critical thinking are important for inspiring reasoning and problem-solving skills.
When a parent or instructor is introduced to dialogic reading, typically they'll be explained that the questions to ask a child should fall into one of the 5 crowd question types, which stand for completion, recall, open-ended, W questions like who, what, where, when, why, and distancing questions. However, we found that when we prompted our model with explanations of these categories, the resulting questions had a lot of overlap between the categories, and it also tended to really oversimplify the categories. So instead, we developed a new method of prompting for dialogic reading questions by using these 6 dichotomous dimensions, which are concrete versus abstract questions, book-focused versus child-focused, open-ended versus closed-ended, contextualized versus decontextualized, recalled versus non-recalled, and predictive versus non-predictive questions. The purpose of these 6 dimensions is to really capture the complexity, depth, and connection to the child required by these dialogic reading questions. So for example, this is a short excerpt of the overall prompt we use to generate questions. You can see that when we introduce a dimension here, like concrete versus abstract questions at bullet point 1, we define what this dimension means, as well as provide an example question, such as what color is the dog as a concrete question, or why do you think the dog is sad as an abstract question. By combining all of these dimensions into one singular prompt, we could really give our model as much information as possible, and it was able to develop some great dialogic reading questions based on that. Some additional considerations we had to look at when prompting was number 1, how many times the child had read the book previously. This deals a lot with recall and predictive questions, because if a child has never read the book before, you can't really ask any recall questions to the child, but you can ask a lot of predictive ones, such as, what do you think is going to happen next in the story? On the flip side, if they've read the story like 4 or 5 times already, you can ask a lot of recall questions like, do you remember what happened from the last time we read? And you don't have to focus so much on predictive questions. How old the child is the other additional consideration we looked at. So obviously, the older a child is, the more vocabulary they can comprehend, especially in early stages of development. It really makes a difference. The number of words a 6-year-old can understand is countless more than a 2-year-old understands. So that really affects the types of questions that can be asked.
Yeah, we pieced together all the essential components for our project. And then subsequent challenge was to integrate them into a user interface. Initially, we chose Gradio due to its simplicity for both developers and end users. As depicted, our design featured book reading section and set of conditions needed to generate dialogic reading questions. The audio input is transcribed, and based on this data, a large language model generates question tailored for the children under the specific conditions. While the Gradio seemed promising, we quickly identified its limitations during our development. Our exploration led us Streamlit as a potential alternative. However, both Gradio and Streamlit share a significant drawback. They do not have a built-in live stream function, and this meant the live stream takes longer than what it's supposed to be, and users had to manually start and stop recordings, which wasn't conducive to our goal of providing parents seamless experience. Additionally, we encountered delays in the critical functions like transmitting audio, transcribing with the Whisper API, and then questions generation using large language model. Ultimately, we settled on the Flask, a Python-based micro web framework, and Flask not only offered us flexibility, but also most of our project's requirements.
Now, before we put this application together, there were a few additional considerations that we needed to address in order to fully implement the pipeline. So firstly, we wanted to allow for matching between audio transcripts and the book text. So we first developed a book database to store these texts. As you can see, our first version on the left was done in Gradio, but we later migrated into the version on the right into Flask for compatible use with the existing transcription application.
So also, there might be some issues with the transcript. The transcript could be recorded wrong, the parent could misspeak something, and we don't want that to affect the quality of our questions. So we've implemented some ways to get the original text given the transcript. And the way that we do that is we use string edit distance. We take the transcript and we see which book in the database has a subsection that's most similar by string edit distance to the original transcript, and then we return that. And based on that text, we can generate our questions without having to worry about whether or not we're generating based on like incorrect reading or just some story that we haven't seen before.
And for this, we have two app models. The first one is the match model, and then we have a non-match mode. For the match mode, we have like access to the book transcript. And for non-match mode, we have to go off spoken transcript only. And for the primary challenge in no match mode, the challenge is how to avoid meta questions, which is the questions about extra conversations, which like the conversations randomly happening between like the parents and the child during their readings. And how to solve this challenge is to potentially use ChatGPT-4. Like we tested by like send a transcript to ChatGPT-4 and then like put some like random speaking conversations between parent and their children into this transcript, and we found that ChatGPT could successfully separate the parent and child conversations from the book content. So like we found that we can use ChatGPT-4 to solve the challenge in the no match mode.
Another factor we wanted to consider as well was detecting the pauses in speaking. And so we wanted to have natural pauses and ask the questions then. So we did this by identifying the significant pauses, which we said was greater than 0.5 seconds. And then that's where we would typically turn the page. We also wanted to ask the questions maybe every 1 to 3 pages at a normal and consistent rate and assume significant pauses at the end of each page. And then what helps with this also was the matching book transcriptions, because that let us keep track of exactly where we were.
So as we tested our prompts in generating questions, our PIs, Amy and Georgene, pointed out that some of the questions are still too difficult for kids, even when we give this age and how many times they read the book. So we decided to add a question difficulty guidelines, or say evaluation section, before the question shown to parents. So first, we have researched how different age groups are capable of linguistically and input these milestone information or other guidelines as input prompt for GPT-4 model to learn in context. Here I just listed some of the criteria. So right now, GPT-4 have the 32K tokens version, so it can take at most 20K words. So another criteria we include is the mean length utterance. So, so we also give the general knowledge of the mean length utterance for different age groups, and what is MLU? So this is just you divide the total number of morphemes by the total number of utterance. And the utterance usually means just a sentence, and morphemes means the minimum grammatical unit. So for example, the word cat has two morphemes, cat and ass. So we ended up including the age-related guidance into the prompt directly instead of have two separate GPT calls because of the time concern. And of course, there are still room for improvements. But we are still impressed by GPT-4 model. We can see that just name a few like longer questions for an older kid, more complex and more imagination required for older children. We can see the question for a 3-year-old, why do you think Mother Rabbit hopped out of the grass? As compared to question for a 5-year-old, can we imagine how the bright sunlight feels on Mother Rabbit's fur? So these are pretty nicely aligned with our guidance.
And now let's dive into our Flask app. At first glance, it might seem minimalistic, but wait until you see how powerful the app is. First, the app can host an extensive collection of books, and parents can easily select and load any book from this collection or even search them. And there is a slider to indicate if a book has been read previously, and you can simply click the button to respond yes or no. And plus, you can input the child's age, and in this example, we'll choose 4 years old, and both are crucial for generating the right and relevant questions. Once you submit, it loads all the book context, and then we can start the reading.
Mother Rabbit sits by her nest under a hedge at the edge of green lawn. Her 5 babies are ready to climb out of the nest for the first time. Mother Rabbit hops out into the bright sunlight onto the green grass.
After the reading, our AI generates the 2 questions, and parents can then choose the best one or both to engage in a deeper dialogic reading experience with their kids. Thank you. Imagine a hardworking parents coming home after a long day, exhaustion weighing heavily on their shoulders. They want nothing more than a bond with the child over a bedtime story. But finding the right story or question to speak meaningful conversation can be daunting. This is where Ada steps in. Understanding the undeniable connection between the early reading proficiency and the future academic success, our goal with Ada is not just about the books. It's about the moments, connections, and fostering lifelong learning. We recognize the challenges faced by many parents in delivering quality dialogue reading experiences. Thus, IDA's vision is to be universally accessible, ensuring every parent, regardless of their day, has the tools they need to turn each reading session into a powerful learning opportunity. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'd like to open this up now for questions or for comments from anyone.
That's the first time I got to see it in action. So obviously it's, it's very simple at this point, but all the work that's gone into this by this whole team, it's amazing. It's been such a privilege to work with everybody.
Professor Troseth, this is something you've been thinking about for a while. So
Yeah.
When did you first sort of make your first pass at creating something like this, an interactive question generating?
Well, it must have been about 6 or 7 years ago. We worked with the Fred Rogers company to put a little character into an ebook they were developing 3 ebooks that went with the Peg Plus Cat series. It was a television show. And if you go to PBS Kids, you can find this. So we made the book as an experimental book, and we've done a bunch of studies with it, but you know, they didn't want to do it, put it on the website or anything. So it just kind of, the project stopped right there, even though it was working so well. So to be able to do this now, where we're thinking about not just one book, where because that group didn't want to continue working with us, we were stumped. But now that with any book that a parent would read, they would be able to use this, and it would help them come up with dialogic questions. Yeah, and you know, Amy and Margaret both know, because of the research that Margaret did for her dissertation, it works really, really great, but it works better for people that have a lot of resources and are highly educated. And so for the people who need it the most, for parents who are working 2 jobs, who are overwhelmed, who don't have the resources and maybe don't have as much education about child development, this is who we really want to target. That if they could easily get this through the App Store or something and use it with any book that they get from the library, then that will be wonderful. And we'd love for it to be free, if it can be, for parents who couldn't afford it.
Fantastic. Great work, team. Thank you so much.